December 19th, 1944. Outside Bastogne, Belgium, 4:47 a.m. Obergefrit Klaus Weber crouched behind a burned-out American half-track and tried to remember the last time he'd eaten real bread, not the grey sawdust bricks the Wehrmacht had been calling bread for the past 6 months. Not the horse meat they'd boiled into glue like soup. Real bread, the kind his mother used to bake in their kitchen in Dusseldorf, with butter that melted into the crust and left your fingers shiny with fat. 3 weeks ago. 4. He couldn't remember anymore. Time had blurred into an endless cycle of cold, hunger, and the constant low-grade terror of knowing the war was lost but having to fight it anyway. The half-track was still warm, maybe an hour dead, its crew scattered somewhere in the snow-covered woods behind them. The Americans had retreated fast when Kampfrop Piper punched through their lines during the opening hours of the Ardennes offensive. Too fast to destroy their equipment, too fast to evacuate their supplies. Which meant somewhere nearby, there were things worth taking. Weber's squad leader, Feldwebel Ernst Hoffmann, appeared beside him in the pre-dawn darkness. 42 years old, a veteran of Poland, France, and 3 winters in Russia. The kind of NCO who'd survived by being cautious when caution mattered and brutal when brutality did. Amerikanische Supply Depot, Hoffmann whispered, pointing toward a cluster of buildings 200 meters ahead. 2 guards visible, maybe more inside. We take it quietly. Weber nodded and checked his Kar 98K rifle. 5 rounds in the magazine. That was it. 5 rounds and a bayonet. Because ammunition was rationed now, same as everything else. The Wehrmacht that had conquered half of Europe with overwhelming firepower was now telling its soldiers to conserve bullets like they were made of gold. The squad moved forward 8 men, spread in a loose skirmish line, boots crunching softly in the snow despite their best efforts at stealth. Weber's stomach growled, loud enough that the man next to him, Schitz, Paul Richter, 19 years old, conscripted 6 months ago, glanced over with a grim smile. "Quiet," Richter whispered. "The Americans will hear your stomach before they hear our boots." My stomach is louder than our artillery lately. It was true. The promised armor and air support for the offensive had materialized in pathetic numbers. A few Panthers and Tigers, their engines coughing from lack of fuel. A handful of Luftwaffe fighters that appeared 4 minutes before vanishing back to bases that probably didn't exist anymore. The offensive was supposed to split the Allied armies in 2, reach Antwerp, turn the tide of the war. Instead, it was 8 half-starved men sneaking toward an American supply depot hoping to find food. They reached the first building, a wooden warehouse, hastily constructed. American efficiency even in retreat. 1 guard stood outside, smoking a cigarette, his M1 Garand slung over his shoulder. He looked young, bored, not expecting an attack this far behind what he thought were secure lines. Hoffmann moved like a shadow. 30 years of soldiering had taught him exactly where to put the knife. Quick, quiet, no screaming. The American guard crumpled without a sound. Hoffmann caught him, lowered him gently to the ground, took his cigarette and finished it. "Americanish tobacco," Hoffmann muttered. "Even their guards smoke better than our officers." Weber and Richter cleared the second guard, this one asleep inside a guard shack, a portable heater running beside him, warm enough that Weber wanted to stop and just stand there for a while. But Hoffmann was already at the warehouse door, testing the lock. It wasn't locked. The door swung open and Weber stepped inside, and his breath caught in his throat. Pallets, dozens of them, stacked floor to ceiling with wooden crates stenciled with American military markings. No guards inside, no troops. Just supplies, abandoned in the chaos of retreat, waiting for someone to claim them. Hoffmann lit a kerosene lamp taken from the guard shack. Yellow light spilled across the warehouse interior, illuminating more food than Weber had seen in a year. "Main guard," Richter whispered. Weber moved to the nearest crate and pried it open with his bayonet. Inside, packed in neat rows, small cardboard boxes, each one stamped with U.S. Army K-Ration breakfast unit, supposedly designed for paratroopers and frontline troops who couldn't be resupplied regularly. The reports had said they were basic, functional, nothing special. Weber opened one of the boxes. Inside, a can of ham and eggs, a packet of crackers, instant coffee, powder, sugar tablets, chewing gum, a chocolate bar for cigarettes in a moisture-proof wrapper, toilet paper, a wooden spoon, matches. He stared at it, then opened another box. Same contents, different variations, cheese and crackers, chopped pork, more chocolate, more cigarettes, more coffee. He opened a third box, a fourth, a fifth, all the same. Every single ration, packed identically, mass-produced with the kind of industrial efficiency that Germany had once possessed and now only remembered like a fever dream. Weber picked up the chocolate bar. Hershey's, the wrapper said. He broke off a square and put it in his mouth. Real chocolate, not the ersatz cocoa powder mixed with sawdust, but the Wehrmacht called chocolate. Real sugar, real cocoa. It melted on his tongue, and he almost wept. How many of these are there? Richter asked, staring at the pallets. Weber did quick math. Each pallet held maybe 200 crates. Each crate held maybe 50 ration boxes. 40 pallets in the warehouse. 400,000 rations. He looked at Richter. Enough to feed our entire regiment for 3 months. This is a frontline ration. That's what the box says. Richter picked up one of the cigarette packs. Lucky strike. He lit one, inhaled, and closed his eyes like a man experiencing religious revelation. Our officers smoke cheaper tobacco than the Americans give to their common soldiers. Hoffman had moved deeper into the warehouse, opening other crates. He returned carrying items like a man in a trance. Toilet paper, actual white toilet paper, not the newspaper scraps German soldiers used. Instant coffee, not ground acorns, not roasted grain, but real coffee that actually smelled like coffee. Chewing gum, a luxury Weber hadn't seen since before the war, and medical supplies, morphine supplies, sulfur powder, bandages, more medicine in one crate than Weber's battalion had received in 6 months. Hoffman set everything down carefully, like he was handling religious artifacts. He picked up a K-Ration box, read the label, opened it, examined the contents. Then he looked at Weber with an expression somewhere between awe and despair. "We've lost," Hoffman said quietly. "We've lost the war. It's over. We just don't know it yet." Weber wanted to argue, wanted to say something about German determination, about the Führer's promised superweapons, about the possibility of splitting the Allied armies and negotiating a separate peace. But he looked at the pallets of K-Rations, at the casual abundance of chocolate and cigarettes and coffee, and the words died in his throat. His unit had been eating sawdust bread for months. They mixed wood pulp into the flour to make it stretch further, and everyone pretended not to notice the splinters in their teeth. They'd been rationed to half a liter of ersatz coffee per roasted acorns ground into powder that tasted like dirt. They wore uniforms patched with whatever fabric could be scavenged. They marched in boots that had been resoled 4 times with leather cut from dead horses, and the Americans were feeding their frontline soldiers chocolate every day. As standard issue, Richter had found something else. He held up a small pamphlet that had been packed with the rations. Instructions for American servicemen in Britain. He flipped through it, his face growing paler with each page. "What is it?" Weber asked. "Instructions," Richter said slowly. "How to behave in England. How to interact with British civilians. What to expect." He looked up. "They printed this. For every soldier. To teach them manners. While we're printing propaganda about fighting to the death." Weber took the pamphlet. The paper quality was good. Clean print, illustrations, professionally bound. Not the cheap pulp paper German newspapers used now. This was the kind of paper they used to waste on training manuals before the war, when resources seemed infinite. He thought about the briefings his company had received before the offensive. No maps. They'd run out of map paper, so officers drew crude sketches on salvaged cardboard. No training ammunition. They'd practiced squad tactics by pointing empty rifles and saying bang. No winter uniforms. They'd been told to take them from dead Russians if they got cold. And here was America, printing etiquette guides for soldiers heading to Britain, as if winning the war was so certain they could worry about whether their troops said please and thank you properly. "Load what we can carry," Hoffman ordered, his voice flat. "We've got maybe an hour before the Americans counterattack. Take rations, cigarettes, medical supplies. Leave the rest. Leave it." Richter looked stricken. "Feldwebel, there's enough here too. To what? Feed our regiment for 3 months, and then what? Where's the regiment going to be in 3 months, Richter? Winning the war, or dead in the snow like everyone else?" Silence. "Take what you can carry. That's an order." The squad loaded their packs and pockets with K-Rations, cigarettes, chocolate. Weber took a notebook from his pack, the one he used to write letters home, and carefully wrote down everything he'd seen. The quantities, the contents, the casual abundance. He didn't know why he was documenting it. Maybe because he needed proof, later, that this had really happened, that he hadn't hallucinated it from hunger. As they prepared to leave, Weber found one more thing, a cardboard box marked for prisoners of war. Inside, more K-Rations, the same ones the American soldiers ate. Same chocolate, same cigarettes, same coffee. The Americans fed their prisoners the same rations they fed their own troops. Weber thought about the German POW camps he'd heard about, the starvation rations, the guards stealing food meant for prisoners. the casual brutality of a system that was eating itself alive. He closed the box, picked it up, and carried it outside. Dawn was breaking over the Ardennes. The snow-covered forest looked peaceful, almost beautiful, if you ignored the smoke rising from burning vehicles, and the distant sound of artillery that meant the Americans were regrouping, preparing to hit back. Hoffman gathered the squad. Back to our lines. Fast and quiet. The Americans will want this depot back. They moved out. 8 men carrying what felt like treasure, though Weber knew it was just normal supplies for the enemy. Just standard issue. Just what every American soldier received, every single day, without thinking twice about it. He thought about his brother Hans, fighting in Italy. Thought about writing him a letter. Thought about what he could possibly say that wouldn't get censored or get him shot for defeatism. Dear Hans, I captured an American supply depot today. I found chocolate, coffee, and cigarettes, real ones. More than our officers see in a month. I think we've lost the war. Not because of their tanks or their planes, but because they can afford to give every soldier toilet paper. If their prisoners eat better than our frontline troops, we've lost more than the war. We've lost the future. But he couldn't write that. Couldn't say it out loud. Couldn't even think it too clearly, because thinking it meant accepting it. And accepting it meant admitting that everything, every frozen morning, every dead friend, every kilometer retreated had been for nothing. So he carried his K-Rations back to German lines and said nothing, and tried not to taste the chocolate still melting on his tongue. December 19, 1944. German lines, Bastogne perimeter, 7:23 a.m. Weber and his squad stumbled back into their company positions, just as full daylight broke over the forest. 2 men were missing, lost during the return trip, probably captured or killed by American patrols that had materialized faster than expected. 6 men returned, carrying approximately 30 K-Ration boxes, 3 cartons of cigarettes, and a canvas bag filled with medical supplies. It felt like they'd robbed a king's treasury. The company was dug into a tree line overlooking a frozen creek. 43 men sheltering in hastily scraped foxholes covered with pine branches and snow. They'd been there for 18 hours without food, without resupply, living on whatever they'd carried in their packs when the offensive began. Most had eaten their last rations yesterday. Some had eaten nothing for 2 days. Hauptmann Friedrich Steiner, the company commander, emerged from the command foxhole as Weber's squad approached. Steiner was 36, balding, wore wire-rimmed glasses that were perpetually fogged in the cold. He'd been a schoolteacher before the war, history and mathematics, and still carried himself like someone more comfortable with textbooks than Schmeisser's report, Steiner said, his breath condensing in small clouds. Hoffman dropped his pack. American supply depot 2 kilometers northwest, lightly guarded. We secured K-Rations and medical supplies before withdrawing. Steiner stared at the K-Ration boxes like they were artifacts from another planet. He picked one up, read the label, opened it carefully. His hands were shaking, not from cold, but from something else. Recognition, maybe, or the beginning of understanding. He examined the contents without speaking. The crackers, the cheese, the chocolate bar, the 4 cigarettes in their moisture-proof wrapper. This is standard issue? Steiner asked quietly. According to the packaging, yes, Herr Hauptmann. Every American soldier receives 3 per day. Breakfast, lunch, dinner. Steiner did the math in his head. Weber could see him working through it. The teacher calculating figures that didn't make sense. 3 rations per soldier per day. Times thousands of soldiers, times weeks and months of campaign. The industrial output required. The resource allocation. The sheer casual abundance that treating food as disposable represented. How many did you see? Approximately 400,000 rations, sir. 40 pallets, untouched, and you took 30 boxes, all we could carry before. American patrols responded. Steiner nodded slowly. He distributed the rations himself, personally, walking to each foxhole, handing out 1 box per man. The soldiers received them with the reverence usually reserved for communion. Nobody opened them immediately. They just held them, feeling the weight, reading the labels, trying to process what they meant. Weber watched Private Johann Bauer, 18 years old, conscripted from a farm in Bavaria, turn his K-Ration box over and over in his hands like he was trying to memorize every detail. Bauer had been eating half rations for a month because the supply chain had collapsed. His uniform hung on his frame. His eyes had the sunken, hollow look of early starvation. Bauer opened the box, pulled out the chocolate bar, stared at it. Then he started crying. Not sobbing, just silent tears running down his dirt and oil-stained face while he held a Hershey's chocolate bar and understood, on some fundamental level, that the war was lost. Weber looked away. Giving the kid privacy felt like the only dignity left to offer. Hauptmann Steiner returned to the command foxhole and sat down heavily on an ammunition crate that served as furniture. Hoffman followed, as did Weber. Squad leaders were expected to attend informal command conferences, especially when there was no formal structure left to follow. Steiner had opened his own K-Ration and laid out the contents on a piece of canvas: crackers, cheese, chocolate, coffee, cigarettes. He stared at them like a crime scene investigator examining evidence. Intelligence reports said American rations were basic, Steiner said. Functional but monotonous. Adequate nutrition, nothing more. The intelligence reports were wrong, Herr Hauptmann, Hoffman said, or they were lying. The three men sat in silence, watching the implications spread like ripples in water. Weber pulled out his notebook, the one where he'd documented the supply depot contents. He'd written everything down during the return trip, crouched in a snow-filled ditch while American artillery searched for them. Quantities, descriptions, observations, the kind of detailed intelligence report that junior NCOs were unsupposed to compile but that someone needed to document. "May I speak freely, sir?" Weber asked. Steiner gestured permission. "Our regiment received 1,000 kilograms of bread yesterday for 800 men. The bread contained approximately 30% sawdust to extend the flour supply. It's been this way for 3 months." Steiner nodded. This wasn't news. Everyone knew. Everyone pretended not to know. "Our daily meat ration," Weber continued, reading from his notes, "is officially 150 grams per man. In practice, we receive maybe 80 grams. Usually horse meat, often spoiled. Our coffee is roasted acorns. Our tobacco ration was cut by half in November. I'm aware of our supply situation, Obergefreiter." "Yes, sir, but I counted the contents of the American depot. If those rations are standard issue, if every American soldier receives 3 per day, then the enemy is feeding each soldier approximately 3,000 calories daily, with chocolate, with real coffee, with cigarettes included as standard issue, not rationed luxury." Weber looked up from his notebook. "We're feeding our frontline troops approximately 1,800 calories per day of sawdust, bread and horse meat, and telling them to fight to the death against an enemy that treats cigarettes and chocolate as disposable commodities." Hoffman lit one of the captured Lucky Strikes. The tobacco was smooth, rich, nothing like the harsh German Airzolt cigarettes that were mostly dried leaves and wood pulp. He inhaled and closed his eyes. "The Americans are fighting a different war," Hoffman said quietly. "We're fighting for survival. They're fighting with surplus." Steiner picked up the chocolate bar from his K-Ration Hershey's. He'd heard of Atomican candy, mentioned in intelligence briefings as evidence of decadent Western culture. The briefings had mocked it. Chocolate for soldiers, proof that America was soft, unwilling to make sacrifices, destined to collapse under German martial spirit. But there was nothing soft about the Sherman tanks that had crushed 2 panzer divisions at Aracourt. Nothing decadent about the P-47 Thunderbolts that owned the skies above the Ardennes. Nothing weak about the American infantry that kept coming forward, no matter how many you killed. They just came forward eating chocolate while they did it. Steiner broke off a square of the Hershey bar and put it in his mouth. The sweetness was shocking, overwhelming. His body responded instantly, a surge of energy. His brain suddenly clearer, his hands steadier. Real sugar, real calories. The kind of quick energy that kept soldiers alert during combat. "We need to report this," Steiner said. "Report what, sir?" Hoffman asked. "But the Americans have food. High command knows they've known for months. Do they know it's this abundant, this casual? Do they understand that the enemy's logistics tail is so robust they can afford to abandon 400,000 rations because recovering them isn't worth the effort?" Hoffman drew on his cigarette. "With respect, Herr Hauptmann, High Command doesn't care. They'll call it propaganda. Enemy psychological warfare. They'll say the depot was staged to demoralize us. Was it staged? No, sir. It was real. I've been soldiering long enough to know the difference between a supply depot and a deception operation. That was real food, real abundance, carelessly abandoned because they have so much more where that came from." Steiner stood and walked to the foxhole entrance, looking out over the snow-covered forest. Somewhere in that forest, American forces were regrouping, bringing up reserves, calling in artillery and air support, preparing to hit back with the overwhelming material superiority that characterized everything they did. And his company, 43 men with bolt-action rifles, limited ammunition, no artillery support, no air cover, no prospect of resupply, was supposed to hold this position until reinforcements arrived. Reinforcements that probably didn't exist, using supplies that definitely didn't exist. against an enemy that fed its soldiers chocolate as standard procedure. How much ammunition do we have? Steiner asked. Hoffman consulted his mental inventory. Approximately 40 rounds per rifleman, 300 rounds for the 2 MG-42s, 4 Panzerfaust rockets, 6 hand grenades. How long can we hold if the Americans attack in strength? Depends on the strength, sir. Against infantry without armor support, maybe 3 hours. Against armor, maybe 30 minutes, and then Hoffman didn't answer. He didn't need to. Everyone knew what end then meant. Surrender if you were lucky, death if you weren't. A shallow grave in Belgian snow either way. Private Bauer approached the command foxhole, his K-Ration box clutched to his chest like he was afraid someone would take it. His face was still streaked with tears. He'd made no effort to hide. Herr Hauptmann, Bauer said, his voice cracking. Permission to speak. Steiner turned. Granted, my brother is in a stock prisoner of war camp in England. British captured him at El Alamein in 42. Bauer swallowed hard. I got a letter from him last month. Took 6 months to arrive through the Red Cross. He wrote about the food. Said the British feed them better than he ate at home. Hot meals. Real coffee. They even get chocolate sometimes. Bauer held up the K-Ration. I thought he was lying. Thought he was trying to make me feel better about him being captured. But this ... he gestured at the chocolate bar still clutched in his other hand. If this is what they feed their frontline troops, what my brother wrote was probably true. Probably, Steiner agreed. Herr Hauptmann, if the enemy feeds prisoners better than we feed soldiers, why are we still fighting? The question hung in the frozen air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Weber watched Steiner's face, watched the captain struggle with an answer that would unget them all shot for defeatism, but also would uninsult their intelligence by pretending the question was unvalid. Because, Steiner said finally, carefully, we're soldiers. We follow orders. The strategic situation is above our rank to question. It was the correct answer, the safe answer. The answer that acknowledged reality while maintaining the fiction of military discipline. It was also a non-answer, and everyone knew it. Bauer nodded slowly and returned to his foxhole. Steiner watched him go, then turned to Weber and Hoffman. If any man in this company attempts to desert, Steiner said quietly, I will not pursue them, do you understand? Weber and Hoffman stared at him. I will not pursue them, Steiner repeated. I will report them missing in action, likely captured by American forces during patrol. The paperwork will be vague. I will not send Feldgendarmerie after them. This was effectively giving permission to desert. This was career-ending. This was potentially a firing squad offense if High Command discovered it. Herr Hauptmann Hoffman began. We're asking men to die for a lost cause. Steiner interrupted. I won't ask them to do it if they choose differently. That's all dismissed. Weber returned to his foxhole, a shallow depression he shared with Richter, barely large enough for 2 men. They'd lined it with pine branches and covered the top with their shelter half, creating a space that was slightly less freezing than the outside air. Richter was eating his K-Ration slowly, methodically, trying to make it last. He'd arranged the components on his mess tin like a formal meal. Crackers on the left, cheese on the right, chocolate saved for dessert. The kind of careful ritual that men developed when food stopped being fuel and became comfort. We're going to lose, aren't we? Richter said without looking up. Weber settled into the foxhole. Yes. How long? I don't know. Months. Maybe. Depends how long High Command keeps pretending what happens to us when we lose. Weber thought about that. Thought about the American supply depot. About the K-Rations packed for prisoners of war. About Bauer's brother eating well in a British stowlock while German soldiers starved in their own foxholes. If we surrender to the Americans, Weber said slowly, we'll probably eat better as prisoners than we're eating now as soldiers. Richter laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that had nothing to do with humor. That's it, isn't it? That's the whole war in one sentence. We're losing to an enemy that can afford to waste food. Weber opened his own K-Ration and pulled out the letter he'd started writing to his brother Hans. He needed to finish it, needed to document what he'd seen, what he'd learned, what it meant. But how do you write that letter? How do you explain that you've lost faith not because the enemy is stronger, but because you've seen their garbage and realized it's better than your best efforts? He picked up his pencil and started writing anyway. Dear Hans, today I captured an American supply depot. I need to tell you what I found, because if I don't write it down, I'll convince myself I imagined it. December 19th, 1944. German lines Bastogne perimeter. 2:34 p.m. Weber sat in his foxhole with the letter balanced on his knee, pencil hovering over paper that was already smudged with dirt and moisture. The afternoon light was fading, fast winter days were short this far north, and soon they'd be back in darkness. waiting for whatever the Americans decided to do next. Richter had fallen asleep beside him, exhausted from the night patrol and the adrenaline crash that followed. His K-Ration sat half-eaten on his chest, rising and falling with his breathing. Even in sleep, he kept one hand on it, protective, like someone might steal it. Maybe someone would. Hunger made men desperate. Weber returned to his letter. Dear Hans, today I captured an American supply depot. I need to tell you what I found, because if I don't write it down, I'll convince myself I imagined it. We found pallets of rations. Not emergency supplies or officer privileges standard, issue for every American soldier. Each box contained meat, crackers, cheese, chocolate, coffee, real coffee, Hans, not acorns, for cigarettes, chewing gum, toilet paper, sugar, and matches. 3 boxes per man, per day. I know what you're thinking. Propaganda. American deception. But I held these boxes in my hands. I ate the chocolate. I smoked the cigarettes. It was real. Our intelligence briefings said American soldiers complained about their rations, called them monotonous, boring. Do you understand what that means? They have so much food, so much abundance, that their soldiers complain about being bored with what they eat. Meanwhile, we're mixing sawdust into bread and calling it nutrition. Weber paused, aware that this letter would never pass the censors. They'd read it, black out half of it, possibly arrest him for defeatism. But he kept writing anyway, because someone needed to document this. Someone needed to say out loud what everyone was thinking in silence. I found a box marked for prisoners of war. Inside were the same rations the American soldiers eat, the same chocolate, the same cigarettes. They feed their prisoners the same food they feed their troops. Remember what you wrote about the Stalag, about the hot meals and the Red Cross parcels. I thought you were exaggerating to make Mother feel better. You weren't. If anything, you understated it. Hans, if their prisoners eat better than our frontline soldiers, what does that say about who's winning? Not tactically, strategically, industrially, economically. It says we've already lost. We just haven't admitted it yet. Weber stopped writing and stared at that last sentence. It was treason, technically, defeatism, the kind of thinking that got soldiers shot by gendarmerie or SS security forces who de-shoot you for doubting the Führer's genius. But it was also true. And truth was becoming a scarce resource, more valuable than ammunition. Across the foxhole network, Weber's captured K-Rations had created a strange dichotomy. Men who'd received the rations were now bartering individual component cigarettes for extra chocolate, coffee for crackers, everything trading hands based on personal preference and desperate need. Private Heinrich Vogel, a 40-year-old conscript from Hamburg, had never smoked in his life. He traded his 4 lucky strikes to Jeff writer Otto Lang for Lang's cheese and crackers. Lang, who'd been a two-per-day smoker before the war and had been rationed to 5 cigarettes per week for the past year, lit all 4 cigarettes simultaneously and smoked them like a chain, filling his lungs with real tobacco for the first time in months. Weber watched this from his position and saw not desperation, but a glimpse of humanity reasserting itself. Men making choices, exercising preference, acting like individuals instead of interchangeable components in a military machine that was grinding them to dust. Hauptmann Steiner had distributed the medical supplies with equal care: sulfur powder for infected wounds, morphine syrettes for the 3 men with injuries too serious to treat with field dressings. The company medic, Senator Franz Müller, had cried when he saw the morphine. Actually cried, because he'd been treating wounded men with nothing but bandages and alcohol for 3 months. Watching them die in agony because German supply lines couldn't deliver basic painkillers to the front. Now he had 6 morphine syrettes. 6 chances to ease suffering. 6 opportunities to act like a medic instead of a witness to suffering. Müller approached Weber's foxhole, medical bag slung over his shoulder. He looked 20 years older than his actual age of 28, hollowed out by months of performing surgery with inadequate tools and watching men die from infections that antibiotics could have prevented. Obergefreiter Müller said, "May I sit?" Weber gestured to the edge of the foxhole. Müller settled in, careful not to wake Richter. "I need to ask you something," Müller said quietly. "About the depot. The medical supplies you brought back, was there more, much more, crates of it? Bandages, sulfur powder, morphine, surgical kits. More than we could carry." Müller nodded slowly, processing this. "Our battalion aid station received its last resupply 2 weeks ago. 15 bandages, 1 bottle of antiseptic, no morphine. The surgeon performed an amputation last week using a woodworking saw and no anesthetic. The patient died from shock." Weber said nothing. What could he say? The Americans have so much medical supply they left crates behind during a retreat. Mueller continued. We have so little that soldiers are dying from treatable infections. How do we justify asking men to fight when we can't even treat their wounds? We don't justify it, Weber said. We just do it anyway because that's what soldiers do. That's not an answer. It's the only answer we have. Mueller pulled out a cigarette, one of the lucky strikes he'd received in the ration distribution, and lit it. He smoked in silence for a moment, then spoke again. I'm going to desert. Weber looked at him sharply. Richter stirred in his sleep but didn't wake. I've decided, Mueller said, his voice steady. When we pull back, and we will pull back, everyone knows that I'm going to fall behind. Get separated from the unit. Find an American patrol and surrender. I'll bring my medical bag. Maybe they'll let me treat wounded. Maybe they'll just send me to a prison camp. Either way, I'll be doing more good than I'm doing here, the captain said. I heard what the captain said. Missing in action, likely captured. I'm taking him up on it. Mueller looked directly at Weber. You should consider it too. You're smart. You see what's coming. Why die for a cause that's already lost? Weber thought about that. Thought about surrender. About American prison camps. About his brother Hans eating hot meals in a British Stalag. About K-Rations and chocolate and the casual abundance of an enemy that could afford to waste resources. I have a brother in Italy, Weber said finally. If I desert, if I'm declared missing or captured, the Gestapo might interrogate my family. Might punish them for my cowardice. I won't put them through that. So you'll die in Belgium instead. Maybe. Or maybe I'll survive and go home when this is over. But I won't make my family pay for my decisions. Mueller nodded, understanding even if he didn't agree. He finished his cigarette and stood. When they write the history of this war, I hope they include what we saw today. The depot, the rations, the realization, because that's the real story, not tanks or tactics, but chocolate and cigarettes and the industrial capacity to treat them as disposable. Nobody will believe it. Then we tell them anyway. Mueller returned to his position. Weber watched him go and wondered how many other men in the company were having the same conversation. How many were calculating odds, considering surrender, weighing survival against loyalty? How many had already decided they wouldn't make it home? At 3:47 p.m., the American artillery started. Not a barrage, just ranging shots, 105mm howitzers, finding their distance, adjusting fire, preparing for something larger. The shells landed in the forest 500 meters west of the German positions, close enough to hear clearly, far enough to not be immediately dangerous. But they were coming closer. Steiner called a company meeting, squad leaders and above, gathering in the command foxhole. 7 men total, representing what was left of a company that had started the offensive with 180 soldiers 4 days ago. The Americans are preparing to attack, Steiner said, without preamble. We VA received orders to hold this position for 24 hours to allow the division to establish a defensive line to our rear. Nobody spoke. 24 hours meant suicide. Everyone knew it. I'm going to be honest with you, Steiner continued, and Weber heard something new in his voice. Not defeat, exactly, clarity, maybe. We don't have the ammunition to hold for 24 hours. We don't have the manpower. We don't have artillery support or armor or any prospect of reinforcement. Steiner pulled out his own K-Ration, the one he'd been saving, and set it on the ammunition crate that served as a table. The chocolate was already gone. He'd eaten it hours ago, but the cigarettes remained. What we do have, Steiner said, is a choice. We can fight until we're overrun, killing as many Americans as possible before they kill us. Heroic last stand. The kind of thing they write folk songs about. He lit one of the American cigarettes. Or, Steiner continued, we can hold for as long as tactically reasonable, maybe for 5 hours, and then conduct an organized withdrawal. Fall back to the division line. Live to fight another day. The orders were to hold for 24 hours, Hoffman pointed out. The orders were written by someone who isn't here, doesn't know our situation, and won't face the consequences if we're all dead. Steiner exhaled smoke. I'm asking you, what do you want to do? It was an extraordinary question. Company commanders didn't ask subordinates to vote on orders. The Wehrmacht didn't operate as a democracy. This was effectively mutiny, collective, polite, pragmatic mutiny, but mutiny nonetheless. Weber looked around at the other squad leaders, saw the same calculation happening in every phase. Fight and die for a lost position, or retreat and survive for a war that was already lost anyway. We hold as long as we can, Weber said finally. But when holding stops being defense and becomes suicide, we withdraw. Preserve the company, live to see home. The others nodded agreement, unanimous. without discussion. They'd all reached the same conclusion independently. Steiner stubbed out his cigarette. Then that's what we'll do. Return to your positions. Prepare for American attack. Hold until holding becomes dying. Then we fall back in good order. Make sure your men understand. This isn't cowardice. This is survival. The squad leaders dispersed. Weber returned to his foxhole and found Richter awake, staring at the forest where American artillery continued to range. How long do we have? Richter asked. Maybe 2 hours. Maybe less. Are we going to die here? Weber thought about the K-Rations, about the chocolate and cigarettes and casual abundance, about an enemy that could afford to abandon supplies because they had unlimited more where that came from, about fighting a war that was already lost against an opponent who treated food as disposable. No, Weber said. We're going to live. We're going to survive this. And someday, when people ask what the war was like, we're going to tell them about the day we captured an American supply depot and realized we already lost. Richter nodded and finished his K-Ration chocolate. They sat together in the foxhole, listening to artillery get closer, waiting for the attack they knew was coming. Weber picked up his unfinished letter to Hans and added one final paragraph. The Americans will attack soon. I don't know if I'll survive, but if I do, I'm coming home. And when I get there, I'm going to tell everyone the truth. We didn't lose because we lacked courage or determination. We lost because we were fighting an enemy that could afford to give every soldier chocolate. That's the real lesson of this war. And it's taken me 4 years to learn it. Your brother, Klausi, folded the letter carefully and put it in his breast pocket, next to his heart, where it might survive even if he didn't. Then he checked his rifle, counted his remaining ammunition, 4 rounds now. He defired one during the depot raid and waited for the war to continue teaching lessons nobody wanted to learn.